So good morning to everyone who's joining us. Thank you for doing so. My name is Matt Baker. I'm the managing editor here at RE Journals. I oversee the Illinois Real Estate Journal, Chicago Industrial Properties, and now Red News in Texas. Before we get going, I want to thank my team members in Chicago who really helped put this all together. And that includes Ernie Abood, John Mickey, Marianne Gerson, Alyssa Galinsky, and Mark Menzies. Plenty more behind the scenes, but that core Chicago team is really what helped turn this huge event every year into an online event. I want to also make sure that you visit all of our sponsors. Again, like I said, we're pivoting to a digital event this year, and the only way we were able to do that is through the help and underwriting of all these incredible sponsors. So, make sure you go and visit that. And we have digital lobbies. I don't know all about that, but there's you can go check that out as well. As I mentioned, we do have a time limit. Unfortunately, we have a hard stop at 12:15, so we can switch to the session 2. So we're going to have to hold to that. So I'm going to stop talking very soon. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to our very capable moderator, Keith Lord. And thank you all.
Well, first of all, thank you. I want to thank the Illinois, the entire team that has put this together for years. You guys have always done a great job, and I'm excited to be moderating this wonderful panel. The Journal is an incredibly great asset to our industry. 2020, I'm going to start off with just an opening. 2020, what a year. In my opinion, our 2020 vision for last year clearly wasn't 2020. We needed better glasses than we started with last year. Between taxes, crime, COVID, government control, social unrest, elections, demonstrations, it's an amazing year. What is bizarre for me is everybody asks all of us, when are we going back to normal? When do we get to the new normal? The last normal wasn't that good. 2019 wasn't a great year. 2020 clearly wasn't. Why do we want to go back to normal? The word normal to me is offensive. It shouldn't be in our vocabulary at all. The only time I want to hear the word norm is when somebody is talking about a beer drinking patron on a Cheers rerun. Retail is setting a new baseline, and that's the key. We don't know what that baseline is yet. It is in the process of being set, and it's going to take months before we get there. So how do we deal with this? Because it is in a tremendous state of change. Well, we have to find really smart people and hear what they have to say, and that's what the goal of this panel is. We have an exceptional panel today. Everybody knows them. Their bios are online. Not going to spend a lot of time on bios. Our first panelist, Mike Demetriou, is president of Baum Realty. What you may not know about him is in a junior in high school, he was a page in Congress, and he was there for the Clarence Thomas hearings. And I'll bet you he's glad he wasn't there the last 24 hours. Deena Zimmerman, Vice President Sperry Van Ness on their National Retail Council, unbelievably great broker. She also used to work, what you may not know, she used to work for the Illinois Real Estate Journal. David Strusiner, Vice President of Leasing of the Strusiner Organization and Development Company. Very interesting thing you may not know, he was actually playing craps at ICSC at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. I don't know if anybody remembers Las Vegas or the Bellagio, but he and his family were asked to have a private tour of the underground lower levels of Bellagio. This is the area where Ocean's 9/11 was shot, many other ocean features. I bet that was absolutely fantastic. Sarah, oh my gosh, wonderful architect, planner, CallisonRTKL. What you may not know is that this summer she got married, not in a church. Because of COVID, she got married under a tree in Lincoln Park. And last but not least, what you don't know about me is one of my terrible decisions is to go into a betting pool with a bunch of guys in April, all stating that we wouldn't get our hair cut until we got vaccinated in August or July of this past year. As it's going right now with the vaccine rollout, I think I'm going to have to be Willie Nelson for Halloween this year. But that's the silly thing and the decision I made. Anyway, let's get to retail. one overall theme, which is really interesting, is COVID really the issue of change for the retail disruption this year? I don't think so. There have been many, many other disruptions and causes of change, but there's also a lot of positive news. And Mike, I want to start with you. What is the new definition of retail? What are the new categories? And Deena, I'm going to come to you afterwards, and I'm just going to ask both of you, let's not discuss COVID until a little bit later in the presentation, not COVID, cannabis until a little bit later in the presentation, because that's a question unto itself. So Mike, start off. What's the new definition of retail? What are we going to be seeing?
Sure. Thanks so much, Keith. I appreciate it. The obvious answer, I think, in 2020 was cannabis, and we'll move that per your request. Second place, which is pretty distant, is I think the disruption of how people are crossing the transom to purchase goods and services. And that's always been my theory of what retail actually means. Obviously, food and beverage is a huge component of retail. It's not the only component. Whether people can access services in a COVID environment has really been a function of local regulatory issues. But the bottom line is we're seeing more services become more like traditional retail, and we're seeing more, commodity-based retail move to omni-channel. And I think I said this last year when we were talking, retail isn't dead, it's just shifting. And if you don't shift with it, you're probably not going to do well. But I think the theory here about omnichannel was that the baptism was in fact by fire, and anyone that wasn't doing it online and wasn't figuring out a way to have omnichannel retail either isn't around anymore or has figured it out. Service-based retail, of course, is a totally different story, and you're seeing the continuation of that shift, but it's been a lot more aggressive. And then within that notion of service-based retail, there are some things that are obviously bright spots, and I can think of none more interesting for the next couple of years prospectively than anything related to animals, veterinary care, services for pets, obviously pet retail and food and things like that. But hospitality type stuff, which is a category people don't even know exists yet, or overnight accommodation or boarding. Pet hospitality is something that is, you might not even be able to Google that definition, but essentially you're seeing country clubs for animals being set up so that owners can entertain each other with their animals. And that's actually a category now, and it's remarkably lucrative from a real estate perspective. It's a great real estate arbitrage. I think the final thing I'd note is that anybody in food and beverage that was doing fine dining has either pivoted or is gone, and the pivots have been interesting. Some of them have been fun. I know it's regrettable, but at the same time, it's been really interesting to see the expression of fine dining in a takeout or a pickup environment. Hopefully, there's an element of that is rewarding for those people as they eventually come back to life. Standard full service restaurants doesn't need much of an explanation. Been brutal, just absolutely brutal. And then on the quick service and fast casual, there are a lot of bright spots. We represent a lot of people in the pizza space. We represent a lot of quick service restaurants, both entrepreneurs and of course landlords who cater to both those kinds of uses. And there are a lot of bright spots. It's been a disaster for food and beverage and for hospitality in general. I don't think anybody would say that they prefer this scenario. There's no way. But if you are able to pivot, and if you have the both resources and the courage, there were ways to figure out something for 2021. I'm excited about where we go from here, because I think some of these lessons will strengthen retailers post-pandemic. But you're right. Obviously, the pandemic was not the cause of a lot of the troubles that we started off the year with. It only was an accelerant on that fire.
Deena, could you give us some idea of new tenants that you're excited about that are expanding? Most you probably represent, but at the same time, you are aware of every good new tenant. Of course, everybody knows Amazon, but what new tenants do you think we're going to be seeing this year?
First and foremost, Mike, I completely mirror and agree with everything you said, to the point where I promise everybody we did not speak ahead of time, but it's so spot on. And Keith, for you to make the comment, normal is offensive. That word, I completely agree with you. I find it to be extremely offensive because I don't want things to go back the way they did before. Before this, we were all sitting on panels last year before, even the year before that. And of course, I'm the only one that's, focuses on retail on these panels, and everyone's attacking me. Oh, retail's dying, retail's dying. Retail has not it's not dying, it's shifting, it's pivoting. I know we use that word so much. And I think if anything, like Mike had said, the pandemic has very little to do with this. There were a lot of retailers, those that we know, it doesn't even matter what category, that were on life support before. What simply happened last year is, I'm sorry to be this blunt and rude, but it pulled the plug on them, which, you know, when you look at the landlords that we all represent, if anything, that helped them make better, quicker, faster decisions on their spaces, you know, giving up the space, backfilling the space, whatever it may be. And, you know, to your point, Mike and Keith asking about retailers that are out there now, it's so funny because right before this panel, I confirmed a inspection for an existing dog daycare that I've worked with for a really long time. I couldn't find her space fast enough. She's looking for multiple locations because she has such overflow, both in the dog daycare and the grooming. So, you know, while vet clinics and groomers, and who I've represented a number of them, they've always been pretty steady, especially since people, you know, started going back to work fast and furiously, you know, once we recovered back in, you know, 13, 14, 15. But now with people working from home, their animals are getting sick of them. And we are, you know, but it's the truth. I know I joke, but it's the truth. And I'm not seeing that just in Chicago, but nationally. So, you know, pay attention to, for those of you who represent or who are building owners, pay attention to what your zoning is and what's allowed, because these are really good, thriving businesses. I'm also seeing a resurgence of startups again. And I think, you know, especially in the salon space, for example, in fitness, even in food. And I think a lot of that has to do because of COVID. I know we don't want to really talk about it, but because of COVID, there's a lot of restrictions, right? Salons can only be open, what, 25%? Well, what am I seeing now? A lot of these salon owners, you're seeing the stylists themselves going off on their own and opening their own small shop so they can then service more clients. And let's face it, they've got an existing book of business. Now they're ready to make that leap in the middle of a pandemic. It's pretty exciting. Like Mike had said, unfortunately, you're right. You know, fine dining, it's taken a devastating blow. But for those, both fine dining as well as fast casual users that had the ability and had a very strong and robust both takeout and third-party delivery system, they have weathered this storm very well. If not arguably, COVID has actually made a lot of these retailers more successful. I just read this morning in Franchise Times that Burger King, if you guys hadn't heard, they're now rebranding. Their prototype for their new store is phenomenal. And they're actually claiming they're doing that because of COVID. Last quarter, let's put it this way, in 2019, their mix of drive-through to in-store was about 2/3 drive-through, now 85%. Last quarter alone, 85% of their business came from drive-through. So again, it's that pivot, fast casual. I'm also seeing a lot of these famous, you know, celebrity chefs and the big fine dining chefs now pivoting to smaller retail spaces so they can just focus only on carry out. And the cool part of that is nobody cares so much anymore, at least the retailers I'm working with, about finding that, you know, A+ main on main location. Sure, it's great, but they don't have to have that. As long as they're somewhere deeply embedded in a neighborhood that somebody can find them on Grubhub, or they can walk down the street as they're walking their dog to the dog daycare and drop them off, they can pick up that food. So I'm seeing nothing but blue skies for a lot of these users this year who are, again, we overuse the word pivot. So I'm going to say they're now shifting and finding opportunity in what's happening.
Thank you.
Deena, we're seeing in some of our larger mixed use destinations that we're adding ghost kitchens to like second and third floors for those celebrity chefs who are just looking for a space.
Kitchen, commissary kitchen. Yeah. It's just really exciting, right? What a great way to repurpose large space.
Yeah, it's cool.
David, I'm going to switch to you real quick. As a landlord, what are you doing to keep the current tenants you have? And what do you plan to do next year to try to attract new ones with your centers?
Wow. Well, first of all, thanks for
in 1 minute or less. Just kidding.
All right. Well, thanks for moderating. What are we doing to keep our existing tenants? What are we doing? We're working with them. We're trying to make it a partnership. We're trying to, the tenants that have closed, we're trying to work with them on an economic basis to say, hey, when you come back, you know, when you reopen, this is your home. You know, so we have multiple deals that we're doing with multiple tenants. And they're all basically economic deals that work for both us and them and we're just creating partnerships. Not that we didn't have a partnership, but now it's more important to even have a stronger partnership so they can get through this crazy time. We can all get through we're all in the same boat together. So we're just trying to make it work for everybody. And that's what we're doing with them. What are we doing for new? Well, I would say the last 4 months, to close out 2020, I've probably done, 4 or 5 different deals. They've all been service. We're just going to continue to plug along and do what we're doing. We're going to send out flyers. We're going to talk to brokers. I had an unbelievable, great conversation with Deena yesterday. We just talked about everything under the sun for an hour, and then we talked about business. So we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to, talk to brokers. We're going to continue to market our space. We're going to, whatever showings we have, we have. Other than that, I'm not quite sure there's much to do differently, other than continue to find what holes we have and see what uses we need. And if they're going to be service uses, they're going to be service uses. That's what we're going to do.
Sarah, I want to switch to you. I know you're working as both a planner and an architect with a number of existing tenants and new tenants. What are you seeing and how are you helping them understand space needs and floor plans and where and what their stores need to look like?
Sure. So, our firm, CallisonRTKL, we work with a lot of retailers on retail design, but then we work with a lot of developers on mixed use design and shopping center and entertainment design. So we kind of have the perspective of both sides. But one of the bigger things we're seeing right now is, bringing retail and services to where people actually are. So we're seeing things like, Nordstrom opening up Nordstrom Local that's more in neighborhoods, or Deena and Mike both touched on pet care. So things like Petco opening up Pet Coach, which is smaller sort of veterinarian and, doggy care in neighborhoods. And then to David's point, in grocery anchored retailers, we're seeing more and more of our retailers who are only located in urban centers or city centers or shopping malls going out into grocery anchored retail centers, because we're seeing more and more of sort of that hub and spoke model that used to exist where all the main things are in the city and you're having just sort of small hubs. We're seeing it more of a dissemination of centers and 15-minute cities and people wanting to be and have the services in their neighborhoods. So to your question, Keith, we're seeing our developers and our retail clients flex on what their spaces actually could be. It's not a one size fits all approach. It's I'm going to fit within the neighborhood that I'm looking to go into, and what's the right design and right approach for that area. It's a bit more localized. It's a bit more customized, especially now with the acceleration post-COVID and people just staying in their sort of 5 to 15-minute zones of where they live.
That's great. David and Sarah, for each of you, what's the future of a grocery anchored center? I mean, does a small tenant or a medium-sized tenant really need a grocery store right now to help them stay alive?
I say yes, and I hope David does as well. I mean, what's funny is only 10% of grocery sales are grocery delivery sales. So you still have 90% of people going to a grocery store, and year over year sales for grocery stores last year were unbelievable. Most of them were up 15, 20% versus 2019. So you still have people coming to grocery stores. And as I mentioned a minute ago, I think these centers are going to continue to elevate what the experience is. They're no longer just going to be sort of these, clunky, dumpy strip centers. I think they're going to continue to create better experiences for the neighborhood and for the community.
David?
I would agree. I would definitely agree. The deals that I've been doing, towards the end of the year, they've been curious and wanting to know what's happening with the grocery store. Is it Main and Main? Yes. Is there a grocery store? Yes. And yeah, because they definitely want to be there for the foot traffic. There are still people, and I agree with Sarah, that are still going to the grocery store, versus doing an Instacart. So yeah, I think it's still important.
David, are you finding you have to change your rent structures for when Deena comes at you with a wonderful new Focus Brands tenant? I mean, I'll get to you, Deena, hold on. David, what are you seeing that you're gonna have to do this year to get that tenant in? And then Deena, I want to go back and say, what do you see that you have to get for the tenant to have them move forward? David?
Well, I'll tell you, the first thing we're doing is we are restructuring our base rent levels to entice people to come. And on top of that, you know, I was having a conversation the other day. There's lots of ways to skin the cat. Free rent, TI, whatever you negotiate. But to answer your question, yeah, when Deena comes to me and beats me up about my rents, yeah, if we want the tenant bad enough, yeah, we'll do what we need to do. We have a happy button. So each of our centers has a happy button. We're not going to go below our happy button to try to make the deal. But, you know, we're going to do what we need to do.
So Deena, when you're representing the tenant, what type of rent structures or changes do you expect to see this year?
By the way, Dave, thanks for those comments. I'm glad this is being recorded because I'll have that for leverage later. Actually, the last, you know, I see the same types of deals I was doing second, third, and fourth quarter of last year, which it's funny because to me, again, being primarily tenant rep, a lot of this has been very reminiscent of what we were doing 10 years ago. You know, when we were in a deep recession, it was working with tenants wanting to get in a space, but being very cognizant that now, then and now more so than ever, it's the next 12 to 18 months, you know, with a lot of uncertainty in what's happening in the world. I mean, in general, I mean, we're not talking just the pandemic. There's a lot going on with politics and with everything, and consumer confidence. So it's really setting up a tenant for success in that next 12 to 18 months. And so every deal we're doing is now 10-year deals like I was doing 10 years ago. And, you know, we're structuring them to be very, 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 very tenant friendly the first year, potentially 2 years of the deal, to the point where, you know, David, and again, I'm warning you to your point, you're really taking that hit. Unfortunately, some landlords probably would potentially even be bleeding, but when we look long-term, we do higher ramp ups, whether it's, you know, flat rent the first 3 years, or you're doing flat rent the first 2 years and then higher, you know, increases, higher bumps after that. We're really at the end of the term, the landlord has been made whole and the tenant is very stable and has been set up for success. And it is a combination of free rent, TI, low rent. Really, it's talking to that tenant, understanding their build out needs, which is, you know, where Sarah comes in, we figure that out. And then ultimately, what's more important to the tenant? You know, is it having low rent? Is it having free rent? Or is it having, you know, more assistance with that build out? So I do think lower rent and free rent are really going to be the hot buttons, especially now, you know, through really Q3.
Michael, can you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think second generation space is going to be available, and I think it's going to be desirable, and I think it's going to be one of the things that we are striving to find for our clients on the site selection side. And I think it's going to be a tremendous part of value add theory when we do investment sales. We do a tremendous amount of investment sales, and you know, a site that typically had a lot of attributes for it, but only had maybe a 3 or 4 year lease term left in terms of a net lease. We do a lot of net lease sales, obviously. That actually now has a wrinkle in it, which is, you know, there's a value add component. Can you bridge a couple of years of revenue while everything settles out? And then we might have a really serious value add opportunity. I think landlords are looking at their second generation spaces as a much greater asset than they ever would have been. And I think what you're going to see in the detritus from a lot of tenants that end up failing is that there is a much faster rebirth and a much faster renaissance because of the notion that there's so much more second generation space out there than there normally is. And I think one of the things that we look at often in multifamily is, you know, shadow inventory. There is a tremendous amount of shadow inventory, obviously in, you know, in residential condominium world, things like that, in every cycle. It's uncommon though to see this much happen in retail, and particularly in large urban areas. You know, you don't have a lot of development because areas are so dense, and you don't see massive amounts of development at the same exact time, because I suppose you do in Houston and Dallas, but certainly not in Chicago. And what you're going to see though is what it looks like in one of those environments. I think the landlords are going to have a tale of two cities. And there'll be some really great times with those well-positioned spaces that are the cream of the second generation crop, because obviously it means faster market entry for a tenant and a lower capital cost to build out. But at the same time, if you have space that's undesirable in those terms, it's going to be challenging. There's going to be a lot more competition. The supply is going to be a lot higher and the demand won't necessarily increase. And so I expect those prices, those rents to fall. I think the final point I'd make on that is if I were a tenant starting out right now, almost without regard to the category, it would be hard to imagine a better time to start. I think this is actually an absolutely opportune time to get into the business of providing goods and services that people access by crossing a transom.
It's great. Sarah, we've got a situation, as we know, in Chicago, where the Loop has almost become a ghost town. With the change in where people are working in office space, how do you see that this year affecting the suburbs versus urban environment? And how are you reacting to that?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I'm sure you've seen that both Macy's and the Gap are leaving Michigan Avenue, so we're going to have some, big vacancies there. But I do think that in the long term, the urban center will thrive. If we look at past recessions, depressions, or even things like September 11th, which caused people to leave the city, you sort of have a 3-year trajectory of people leaving, and then people return back to the urban centers 3 years later. So I think right now we're really seeing some suburban areas thrive. We've been working with the planning committee with the Village of Glenview and how they can really capitalize on this time while people are moving from city centers to suburban centers. So we're seeing some retail growth there. But I truly believe that it's a bit short-sighted for downtown Chicago to think that Michigan Avenue is going to be empty for the next 10 years. I think, just as Mike was saying, I think there are going to be some people who capitalize on those opportunities that are available now for when we see, and I'm kind of calling it like the roaring 21s post-vaccine. I think people are going to want to get out, spend money, have experiences, and not be in their home as they have been for the past year and a half at that point.
Interesting. All right, so let's attack the $1 billion pound gorilla, if I can call it that. Obviously, it's cannabis. For those of you that don't know, we have two of the foremost knowledgeable cannabis people, Mike and Deena, on this call, representing both landlords and tenants. And I really want to open it up to both of you again. Is cannabis the silver lining? Is this what's going to save this round of change? What do you see happening in 2021? Because right now it's in a gray state of flux. And again, the word normal doesn't even get close to approaching anything to do with cannabis in any environment. So Mike, why don't you start us off? What do you see happening? And then Deena, please follow.
It's interesting. I don't think it's a silver lining. I don't think enough people can participate in it for us to call it that. It's funny though, that the organization that is 50 years old probably, that really laid a lot of the groundwork, is called NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And the theory here is that as it becomes normalized, there's going to be a larger economy here. If that's the case, that there is actual normalization, Safe Banking Act, things like that, the marijuana economy, the cannabis economy might become a silver lining for lots of industries. I mean, there's a lot to do in this space. It's not just about having dispensaries, as Deena and I can tell you. We made a lot of income in 2020 on cannabis brokerage revenue. There are people who sell lighting and who sell, shovels to the gold miner, if you will, and that world is going to increase. I do think, though, that from a macro perspective across the entire United States, but particularly in heavily regulated states like Illinois, although maybe not so much in unregulated states or relatively weak regulation states like Michigan, I do think that having a from $0 to $1 billion retail entrance into your state is going to change some things. And it's certainly going to change the views of people that were previously prudish on the topic. And it's certainly going to change the views of people who find, the vice uses to be something they don't want to participate in. We were looking before Mayor Lightfoot had set out the rules and constrained where you could go. We were looking all up and down Michigan Avenue for a user to open up very large stores where rent really wasn't going to be an issue. And we really wanted to do, the Apple store, if you will, type of a story. That wasn't possible because of the views of the people on the street. The views of Michigan Avenue and Oak Street wouldn't really accommodate it very easily. That's going to change. And when that changes, you'll see it trickle down eventually to a lot smaller category, whether that's I'm going to have a cannabis consulting firm, or I'm going to be in fertilization land, or I'm going to, whatever it is. I think you're going to see that trickle down, and in many ways, the cannabis economy will be a bright story for heavily regulated states like Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania are coming online shortly in the years to come.
Deena?
I completely agree with everything Mike said, especially Michigan Avenue, right? I mean, we hear the announcement of Gap and Macy's. Who better to backfill those spaces than, and to your point, Mike, it's not just dispensaries. I think there's going to be even more ancillary industries based on cannabis coming out of this, maybe because of what's going on now. I think once we get past all of this and the regulations and such, I do think this is going to be really quite a beautiful renaissance for cannabis. I mean, it's just different, right? I thought as of May 2nd, I was going to be completely bombarded and totally busy, doing site selection for 6 months, once the licenses were awarded. Right, that's different now. And I think, the conversations I'm having with my clients, my cannabis clients every month is, all right, this stinks that this is happening. It changes our plans. However, where's the silver lining in this? And I think back to when I got into cannabis and representing clients back in 2013. I mean, Mike, I'm sure you remember, and Keith, if you were doing it too, I was hung up on all the time. All I had to say was the word cannabis, brokers, owners, everybody hanging up on me, right? Now that changed a bit last year, and even the beginning of this year a bit, but a lot of the deals we negotiated or tried to negotiate, people were just super not into cannabis. All of a sudden, here we are, January 2021, and I can tell you, I wish I had the exact numbers. Since then, at least once, if not twice a week, consistently this entire time, I have folks reaching back out to me who still have vacant retail spaces. All of a sudden, cannabis isn't such a bad idea, because think about it, when we locked down grocery and convenience, small convenience, liquor and cannabis, and tobacco, unfortunately, all of those sales went through the roof because we were all stuck at home. So if anything, I think that has helped cannabis because it's shown how much revenue it can generate and how legitimate this business is. Of course, we all believed that, but again, Mike, you made a good point. I love the word prudish. So I think there were a lot of owners who were prudish about this who now are changing their tune. So if anything, I think it's a shift in perspective that will really carry us to places I don't even know, but I'm pretty excited this year, once we can have that lottery and really move forward, not just with dispensaries, but let's see what happens with craft grow. And I'm really excited about infusion and potentially, on-site consumption and everything that can happen with that. And, even Sarah, like you said, why can't this be a part of experience-based that people are going out and doing,
we had
restaurants and such.
We looked at worked with a client a couple of years ago who was looking at creating sort of like a quote unquote weedery that was like sort of a brewery type experience for cannabis. And it was what people were looking for, that sort of experiential type visit. That's not just a transaction. It's what people want to understand and learn and see. And I think it's coming.
Totally. And even the culinary kitchens, people, you're looking at the groups looking for that and creating the edibles and creating an experience. And I think it's going to be really exciting.
David, as a landlord, what has your all position been, and how do you see it potentially changing?
On the cannabis subject?
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot. I know that's tough, but.
Well, here's the thing. I don't know how many people actually know. I mean, I work with my family, and two of my family members are what I'm going to call old school. I'm not sure that they're crazy about it. And I think that their image of the use is the type of people that it brings to our center. Now, that being said, we're in the middle of doing a large industrial building of a grower. But I think that if the right opportunity came along, I could probably convince them, as a business decision, to make this happen. Because everything that everyone has said is absolutely true. I mean, we can't shy away from what's happening. Now, is my phone ringing? Do I have lots of people that want this? No, I don't. But that doesn't mean that I think we would entertain it if it was the right deal with the right people.
Which, by the way, tracks exactly with what Deena, what you said, is I think this is going to be the year that it becomes more acceptable. We just got to get as Michael said, the bank regulations changed, and Biden has a pretty good shot at doing that. We don't have a lot of time left, and I'd like to do a speed round for each of you. And the question is, what are the key factors that each of you are watching right now to help you predict and plan for 2021? I know it's a big question. We've got time for short answers. Sorry. Anybody want to start? Key factors.
Sarah's already said Sarah's the smartest one on the panel here. She's already said it twice. If anybody hasn't been paying attention, I'll do the cliff notes. Experiences. Yeah. Everything is going to be about that. And in 21 and 22, experiences are going to make a ton of money for landlords. Tenants are going to grow because of it. It's about experiences. And that word has to factor in to literally every discussion that you have in terms of retail.
Mine is actually less retail related, and I'm so curious about work from home versus working in office and how that shifts in the next year, and what does that mean for all of that real estate and how it impacts where people are and where people are spending. So it almost impacts every single sector. If work from home remains a bit more sticky versus having the hybrid model of people both working from home and working in office. So I'm pretty curious to see where that lands in the next year.
David?
Again, I think it's what everyone's been saying. I think it's experiences for sure. I don't think that the word retail is going to be retail. I think it's going to be quasi retail. I think it's going to be service uses. I think it's going to be food. And that's okay. That's what I think is going to happen. I don't think you're going to find other than the dog use, and that's more service, but there's no clothing stores. There's no cell phone stores. There's no, I just don't think it's happening.
It's health and wellness too. We didn't talk about that much today, but that's a big topic. Well-being.
Health and wellness for sure. Agreed. Yeah. All of those.
Deena?
And bike shops, right? I work with one out of Milwaukee, Wheel and Sprocket. Guys, I'm looking South Shore, Hyde Park. I'm not kidding you. I think those are the uses. You're so right about experiences. And David, you're right. It's not traditional retail anymore. I think somebody said this earlier, if not now, when? This is such a great opportunity. This is the renaissance for entrepreneurs. You want to start a business or you want to expand your business, take advantage of every opportunity that's out there this year. I know there's a lot of challenges, but every day there are those silver linings. And I'm going to get a little more personal here. I think it's been really fun this past year to get more personal with our clients. And I've put more tenants and landlords together at the beginning of a transaction, which typically we don't do, because it really is, we're all in this together and it really is a partnership. And so I think entrepreneurship and partnership, I think that's going to lead the way this year.
And I agree with you, Deena, and just in closing, what we always forget is retail always changes, and everybody on this panel has brought that up. We have to look back at the last 10, 15 years, the introduction of internet, the introduction of cell phones, delivery, online buying. What this shows us is change is normal, and as I've always said, change is good. The difference now for our industry is change used to happen over a period of months and potentially a year. Right now, it's much faster. it's happening in a period of a month or potentially a week. And certainly with government changes, it's coming at us like a fire hose. But we have to remember in our industry is that actually in life, success and the most success, dollars and the most dollars are built out of disruption, failure, and change. If we're not complacent, as Mike mentioned, if we go out and attack the change, that's where we can help landlords, tenants, and grow our own businesses. And so with that, Matt, can we open it up to any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Got 2 or 3 minutes here.
Do you see any person that is on the call that has a question? Because
You know, there was just one comment, and I think it was, let me pull up the chat log here.
Yeah, about national leases, national tenants. You know, I think that's probably a fair point. I think that's going to change pretty quickly. I think a lot of leases, you know, we've looked at this on both sides of the coin here. A lot of leases say that the landlord can't do anything that's illegal under local, state, or federal law. Obviously, that's a catch-all right now for a lot of cannabis uses, although it's not always clear. But if you're talking about specific, if the person who asked the question is talking about specific prohibitions against cannabis, I think there are a lot of them that are out there that will probably evaporate over time. I don't imagine that people in retail are going to want to shoo away the $150,000 average income people that are currently buying it, or the $50,000 a year average income. They're a draw, and so obviously those lease clauses will change over time.
Matt, was there another question that just popped up? I saw a note.
Yeah, the question reads, not sure if anyone saw that Amazon is now building affordable housing. How long until they become developers?
Not long.
No,
You know, I would
not already.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm pretty sure they're already doing some development work. So I think that's a super interesting point someone brought up. I think they have their hands in a lot of things right now in development. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not just right around the corner.
And I'm going to respond to Charlie M. Amazon is all over this business. Let's understand they have 3 different grocery stores right now. They have Amazon grocery stores that they're rolling out. Don't forget they own Whole Foods, and they have a small format Amazon that they are also rolling out. The question is are they going to buy CVS or Walgreens because they need to get into that business? But yes, Amazon is going to continue as a developer, as a buyer, and to expand their world. Anybody else want to comment on that? Our last minute.
What's Amazon?
Yeah. It's a disruptor bigger than COVID.
I see there's one question here that says, how is everyone handling pandemic language in new leases? I can certainly answer that for, you know, myself. We are not using and we're not putting any pandemic language in our leases moving forward because at the moment our lenders are not approving it. It's that simple.
Wow.
And I am, but it has to be upon lender approval. So we're getting lenders and attorneys involved more now than ever before. But I'm doing pandemic language in every single lease I'm doing.
Great.
Great.
Incredible.
Fantastic comments, guys. I have to stop it there, but this was a very informative panel. I'm sure lots of people are on because just everyone wants to know what's going on before the pandemic with the sector and even more now. So again, thank you all for your time and your expertise.
And thank you all.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Good. Stay healthy.